So it seems that we've got some absolutely enormous Warhammer 40k teasers, with Games Workshop giving us some very on-the-nose hints that Prince Yriel, Eldar Corsairs, and something for the Iron Warriors are coming. Let's talk about their hype teasers for Christmas Day reveals and the 500 Worlds campaign. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where today we're talking about Games Workshop's latest teasers and reveals, giving us some very specific teasers towards certain models coming out in the near future. Games Workshop revealed their 500 Worlds End Edition campaign at their last major preview. Since then we're still waiting for the Titus book to release, and so far it looks like from pre-order dates that's going to be late January at the earliest, unfortunately. So barring any surprises, it still looks like we've got a fair while to wait until that comes out. For the next anticipated Warhammer 40k releases though, we're expecting any more news as to what's coming after in that series, and Games Workshop really have given us quite a lot of hints to work with recently. We know the general pattern of the books and how they're going to release. We've got a whole bunch of fairly identifiable rumour engines. They've done their sort of ultra protest, teasers and hype campaign, which they've just sort of left hanging with an ambiguous statement. And then now over the course of this week we've got two interesting lore shorts that focus around two things in Warhammer 40k rather specifically. A Chaos Prophecy that doesn't name them outright but just seems very focused on the Iron Warriors, and then a lore story specifically for Prince Yriel of the Eldar today, which to my mind basically confirms that we will be getting him as a miniature, and brings some other interesting teasers for the Eldar Corsairs, what sounds like a few more hints beyond them, and also touches on the Inari a little too. I guess that most of these are building towards their Christmas Day reveals, when they usually show off a few fun new model kits there. To round up what we know so far, we've got a whole load of rumour engines that look rather specific for Warhammer 40k, a couple of things that look like they're from a recruit character, a sort of Eldari sash thing that's probably from Corsairs, a Pale Spear that looks like it's a Black Library miniature for an Alpha Legion character, and then a bunch of other slightly less specific but looking like Chaos rumour engines, including one rather sinister looking medical device that is a pretty close fit for Fabius Biles. The way that the next miniature release batches are going to come out is via these End Edition campaign books. We've had the first of them declaring the setting is the 500 Worlds of Ultramar, the initial fight being between Ultramarines and Destroyer Necrons, and then as they did with the other books like Arcs of Omen, we'll have a narrative going from there, likely some of them sticking with the main storyline, and then others focusing on more specific fights such as Angron in the Imperium Nihilus or Farsight fighting Orcs and Chaos. In the books we're going to get a whole bunch of lore progression. It's often in these series that we get more interesting shake-ups to the Warhammer 40k status quo, particularly revolving around certain key characters. I guess we'll find out how the quest to destroy all life works out for Necrosaur Amantar so far. There's some mini expansions for the boarding actions game mode in each one of the books, I guess with some content slanted towards the factions that are featured within them. There's a narrative campaign book billing itself as a complete campaign system for 40k to fight your way through the narrative of these battles. And then for some wider gameplay content, there's going to be 6 detachments in the first one, a pretty reasonable chance that we get a sort of similar number on the rest, so I guess quite a lot more choices coming for the Ultramarines and Necrons. I wouldn't be too surprised if a good chunk of these detachments focus around one special character, given that the order of the day seems to be a lot of named characters coming out in these. Then of course alongside all this we'll get the models and rules updates. Games Workshop revealed the first wave, a couple of things for the Space Marines and Necrons as the main antagonists. There are a few other things like the Twin Lance for the Tau and the Tyranid Prime with Lash Whip. It looks like quite a lot of factions are going to get something minor, or these will be coming with data sheets as well, so it seems pretty reasonable that we're going to be getting quite a lot of updated sculpts for 40k and new rules to go with. Then finally there's going to be some themed army options called 500 Worlds Battalions. So far I've only seen the Necron Destroyer one. If they follow this kind of pattern they'll be in a similar sort of price range to combat patrols, and certainly could be interesting in their own right as an extra discount deal for various factions out there. Then finally for teasers that could be building up to Christmas Day, we've had those ultra protest things that Games Workshop made at quite a lot of effort. It seems more likely to me that they're going to be teasing something at least somewhat specific. They seem to be softly saying that they had some interest for Chaos more so than Ultramarines going forward. They rounded off the little series with a curious statement that every release from now will be an Ultramarines release. It's not impossible we might get yet more for the Sons of Guilliman. My guess is that they're doing this a bit tongue-in-cheek in some way, maybe slaying Ultramarines on the base. Or I suppose if we're doing Red Corsairs, maybe a Renegade Ultramarine or something. If the Wordbearers t-shirt that they had was really a hint, it could even be a hint to Erebus or Lorgar for either Warhammer 40k or the Horus Heresy setting with a new sculpt. Basically with all of those teasers we're expecting some more character models, and certainly between the rumour engines and the Ultramarines thing a bit more chaos, and that brings us to the teasers that Games Workshop have released this week. They've been releasing some bits and stories for Warhammer 40k as they've rolled out the Grotmas calendar, along with fiction for the other settings. The first one was maybe a slightly less overwhelming one, basically hinting that Lieutenant Titus was coming to Ultramar. I don't know if the idea of that might have been that it was supposed to be a hint and we didn't know the model was coming out yet, but given that it had already been revealed and that entire narrative had been showcased, it wasn't really much of a teaser. On Monday though, Games Workshop released another one, and this one was far more interesting and a bit unusual. It was titled A Message from Within the Eye. According to the text description, it features a hidden chaos cult that worships the Eye of Terror itself, and the cult is located on an Imperial-held world of Eldar Delphos, which as best I can tell I think is just a new world to the setting, not really mentioned too much before, and features a cultist going to a secret temple to hear the prophecy of Grandmother Eye, who seems adept at hearing voices from the warp, with some clear actual warp magic sorcery going on. Just to make it clear that the prophecy worlds should be focused on, Games Workshop even decided to put them in bold, and they seem rather specific for the Iron Warriors. Before we jump into that and go through the Corsairs, I'll just take a minute to give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in the Magnet Baron. They sponsored the video and wanted to share their magnetic components for 40k kits and more, if you did want to explore that side of the hobby. Magnets are certainly something I use in a very big way in my own hobby, particularly for bigger tanks and vehicles and things that are really easy to swap out one thing for another. I've got loads of value out of my magnetised Lehman Russes with all the options and my Imperial Knights. The Magnet Baron aims to make that process just a little bit easier, having some very specific kits that are targeted at certain Warhammer 40k models. Some of them are a bit more straightforward, with just the right size magnets needed and a rough instruction as to how to use them, where some of them, like their Canis Rex Knight kit, are bigger and a lot more high effort, and come with a whole bunch of 3D printed components so you don't have to drill anything and can just assemble with some instructions. They've got really quite a lot of those kits and plenty more besides, things for bases, all different sizes of magnets in general, and flight stand bundles. You can check them out linked down in the video description if you'd like to. And if you're looking for magnetising tutorials, they do have a YouTube channel now as well. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring this one. Digging into that prophecy though, the first segment is the Shattered Gate vomits the Get of the Storm. They fight beneath the Staring Eye, worlds blessed and worlds cursed, and the defeated are yet defiant. The Shattered Gate kind of has to refer to the Cadian Gate. They basically confirm that in the text around the article, and in particular saying that the Chaos Cult worships the Eye of Terror. Well, that seems very specific to that. The Get of the Storm, I suppose, meaning what the storm has created. I've seen lots of people interpreting that in different ways, maybe not very specific within 40k. You could certainly imagine it could be certain Primarchs like maybe Jagatai Khan or Lehman Russ. Here on Blackheart lights the Maelstrom, it could just be the forces of the Eye of Terror crusading out as they did to break the gate. It's maybe not super clear if the whole thing is just referring to the fall of Cadia and the forces of chaos spreading out to fight along the Cicatrix Maledictum, or if it's something else coming out of the Iron Cadia more recently. The next bit reads, the Black Sun burns cursed iron and lights the furnace of vengeance, steel and flesh and blood and ichor tear and flow, and from the ruin shall rise infinite geometries of spite. Overall still all a bit cryptic, but multiple things that point towards sort of mechanical chaos, talking about furnaces and iron and geometries of spite and steel. It all gives a rather mechanical sort of feature. Perhaps the most specific thing seems to be that Black Sun though. There are potentially other things out there that it could fit in 40k, but with the context of all the iron and steel and spite stuff, realistically I don't think it's going to refer to anything else other than the Black Sun above Medrengard, the demon world for Perturabo and the Iron Warriors, and maybe appropriate enough to be talked about by a chaos cult who like the Eye of Terror, as it is in the Eye of Terror. It seems there's even a 40k novel with Black Sun on the title of it called Dead Sky Black Sun, which looks like it's partly set on Medrengard itself. All the other bits line up nicely enough for the Iron Warriors as well. Being spiteful and bitter and resentful does seem to be their thing. Doesn't necessarily mean it couldn't be other chaos tech though, maybe in particular Vashtor's forces. They feel like one of the biggest powder kegs and narrative devices that Games Workshop have in the fire at the moment, and more things could turn up for them at any point. Then finally the prophecy rounds out with Children of Eldar Delphos, faithful of Galagan. The time of whispers is ending, soon will come the time of knives. Make ready, true believers, deliverance comes, iron wrought and vengeful. I'm not sure if the place names are any particular play on words or anything. It seems that that's the world and maybe the city that they're in or something. Again, doubling down on going for iron wrought though does imply chaos of one particular flavour. The narrative basically rounds out with the cultists taking this to mean that the time of their uprising is at hand and they make themselves ready to throw off imperial rule on that world. Games Workshop round off their article by saying whatever could they be talking about, I'm sure we'll find out one day, and knowing them it's probably going to be one day fairly close, given that this is most likely hype for their end edition campaign. It basically does confirm that we're supposed to take it as a teaser in any case. If this is really sounding like Iron Warriors could be interesting for collectors of them in Warhammer 40k, They're one of the most popular and collected legions out of the non-deity ones, though when compared with the Space Marine equivalent chapters for the first founding ones, it is notable that Iron Warriors and Word Bearers and Friends have very little representation, if any, in Warhammer 40k. The Iron Warriors literally have none besides things like that previous Warsmith that went out of production ages ago. They always get a fair bit more support in Horus Heresy, if anywhere. Though maybe feels for the Iron Warriors specifically, they're not too badly served by the entire sort of Demon Engine kind of slant to Chaos Space Marines. Anything there works rather well for them, including tanks and obliterators and things. If they're mentioning the Black Sun of Medringard, then it really does imply them this time around. And if Iron Warriors are coming, the biggest question will be whether or not they go for another Demon Primarch, or we get Perturabo this edition. It's kind of in an equivalent space to Lorgar at the moment, both out there and active in the current 40k galaxy. They just haven't shown up on the tabletop in model form yet, and it's basically up to Games Workshop when we get round to them. Maybe we'll get both of them turn up in the end edition campaign, maybe we'll get one, or maybe we'll get neither. Otherwise though, if they were going to do a focus Iron Warrior release, I strongly suspect that we might get a sort of more normal sized named character, a named Warsmith to represent the Legion, maybe someone from established lore, maybe someone new. And they could potentially do them an upgrade through, maybe kind of similar to the Night Lords ones. If they did wind up getting some major focus in some way and a small range release, it could also be possible they could twin it with Vashtor's forces, who feel like they'd be more at home there than in more generic Codex Chaos. Vashtor and Dark Mechanicum seem like one of the single most guaranteed things to get a big release wave and new army at some point, though not necessarily anytime soon. It could be a possibility they could start developing that range within the overall umbrella of Codex Chaos Marines while it's small. Perhaps some Negavolt cultists like the ones from Blackstone Fortress, or a new Soul Grinder could be a new option there given their recent lore focus. That's all very intriguing for the Chaos Marines with the Hazard Stripes, but that wasn't the only teaser, as we've now got a Prince Yriel story today, where things being featured and talked about are far more clear, with a short lore story of basically him dispatching himself from Iyanden on a quest. And for a small excerpt without any fighting or anything, it's pretty interesting for the amount of things that get touched on here. Though of course Yriel himself is going to be the biggest and most obvious focus. Prince Yriel is the sort of cursed Eldari Corsair prince taking up the Spear of Twilight in the defence of Iyanden. His returning Corsairs were able to vanquish High Fleet Kraken, though not before they left the craft world to the ghost of its former self. It's a pretty big name in the lore just regardless, and it was pretty notable when he didn't get a model update and a datasheet in the current Codex Eldari. He definitely felt like one of the ones to me, along with Karandras, that he will absolutely return in some form. It's just a question of when, not if. The article and story was titled "We Catch Up with an Eldari Admiral," and starts out with Prince Yriel meeting the nobles of Iyanden in the craft world itself, where he seems to be stationed with his Corsair fleet in reserve to defend the craft world when needed. It starts off with him meeting an Ayana Arianel, a named high spirits here from the lore from quite some time past. She previously had some rules in a previous edition, though never had a model. A more recent lore for her had her throwing her lot wholeheartedly in with the Inari, perhaps particularly pertinent as a spirits here and the ruined craft world of Iyanden in general, who probably really want some goodness to be found in their sacrifices. As for what happens in the story, Yriel entreats Iyanden, and basically says that the craft world is mismanaging its resources and being directed at the whim of the Inari, which he sees as a death cult and getting more extremist, and the craft world should more wholeheartedly devote its attentions to countering the machinations of chaos. But given that Ayana is pretty much the staunchest supporter of the Inari out of anyone, she basically answers for the council with a resounding no, and Iyanden isn't changing course. This basically annoys him, and he walks back with a Corsair character. He feels that his fleet and his spear need to be used in action to take the fight to the craft world's enemies as opposed to sitting back in reserve, and travels down to the dock to oversee his fleet, all ready to go through webway portals when needed. When there, he's then met by Harlequins aboard his ship, the Flame of Azayan. These Harlequins are from the Mask of the Midnight Sorrow, a Harlequin mask that's closely associated with Chimera and the Drukhari, and also in particular fighting against Chaos, and in the past they've certainly furthered the Inari's cause by working with Eldrad Ulthuan to try and awaken the God of the Dead early. And they basically have another slightly cryptic message for Yriel, saying that treasures of our people are lying scattered, and they can be used as weapons to change the fate of the craft worlders and more, and state that these can be found in the Nightmare Gulf with danger all around, aliens, cursed tides, betrayal, reavers and tyrants. This seems to be enough for Prince Yriel to depart, so he decides to marshal his fleet and leave on this quest, finding it only too tempting to pursue a course of direct action. To my mind, having Yriel featured in this short in this way pretty much confirms him as a model that's going to be coming out. Along with Huron Blackheart and maybe a few others like perhaps Trazyn the Infinite, he seemed like one of the characters that could be particularly likely to come out now. He had already been widely rumoured and talked about, so any hints of Yriel were certainly going to be jumped on, never mind something like this. And if they're going to feature him as a central character in a lore short, there's no way that they'd be doing that without giving us a model to buy. Beyond that, it seems to likely set the stage for the rumoured Eldar Corsair release that Chapter Master Valrak's been mentioning a few times. I believe they're supposed to be a jump pack unit and some sort of Viper variant, and seems like it could expand them into a small range, maybe kind of similar to how the Harlequins are now. On top of that, we had a pretty specific character name drop in this one called the Void Dreamer. When heading back to his ships, Yriel's accompanied by the chief Void Dreamer, Karseth, and Void Dreamers are essentially the equivalent of Imperial navigators, psychers and helmsmen of ships, able to guide their craft throughout the warp, and no doubt a very important role within the Corsairs in general. These have been a unit in Warhammer 40k in the past. They were in the Forge World army roster that Corsairs fairly briefly had. There was never a model for them, but I feel like if we're getting that name and a named character for them, there's pretty good odds that we are going to get a model for them as well, maybe to be Yriel and the Void Dreamer, and they might be some of the main characters of the army, and then some other generic units beyond that. Otherwise, some of the other teasers in that were interesting enough too. Cool to see some Harlequins and Inari mentions. They're both Eldari sub-factions that could also expect some sort of extra models at some stage. If the focus is going to be Corsairs at this point though, I'm not sure what the odds are for this release in particular. It doesn't necessarily seem that there's any major updates for the Inari. Lots of the characters that initially joined them have since abandoned the cause or not been quite as zealous towards it. Iandin's very much holding firm though. She could also be a potential miniature to release, but I'm not sure if they'd stretch to more than one Iandin-focused miniature beyond Yriel really. Harlequins are also a faction that could easily have new sculpts. They've not had anything for them in around about 10 years. They could be redone as a kill team or something like that, and the identity of those weapons is interesting too. It might be something Craftworld related, though if it's something Harlequins, maybe it could even tease a new unit for them. Could be fun if you had some sort of way to put an avatar of Segarak on the board or something. Otherwise, that slightly cryptic prophecy also sounds like it could be Huron Blackheart as well. I'm not 100% sure if that Nightmare Gulf or just the Cicatrix Maledictum or something, but kind of notable that they mention Reavers and Tyrants towards the end of that little prophecy, both of which could very easily refer to the Red Corsairs and the Tyrant of Badab, who was also a kind of predictable model release right from the start of the edition, another big deal character from the lore with an ancient model, and still remains in Codex Chaos Marines despite not having a plastic kit. I guess we've still got a few more days of their Grotmas calendar to go. We might get another lore short for 40k. And it seems pretty possible that we could get some further confirmation, maybe if they focused on a similar one following Huron or the Red Corsairs. In any case, certainly some interesting stuff. I guess we'll find out at least about some of these on Christmas Day, maybe both Eldari and Chaos if we get lucky. Let me know your thoughts as to Games Workshop's latest teasers and what they might mean down in the comments below. What would you most like to see them reveal? In any case, that's just about it for this one. Before I go, I'll just cycle back to the Magnet Baron, the video sponsor, makers of all things neodymium based in the USA. As well as things mentioned earlier, for their other offerings, they've got a magnetising starter bundle, a bunch of different drill bits with a pin vise, magnet applicators, glue, and a whole bunch of ones to get you going. Can be handy enough when you're breaking into a new part of the hobby to have everything in one place. Those applicators are quite a popular thing, is to have the right polarity for the magnets, and they sell those separately. And also, of course, have just about every size and shape of magnet under the sun. They have quite a few flush fit ones that can go under bases as well. They do have lots of specific kits aimed at certain models though, some of them extra fancy ones with 3D printed components sold alongside, and several of them with quite good instructions to go with as well, or their recent video tutorials. The flight stands are quite nice as well. I quite like the big chunky ones that can go under some grav tanks or various other 40k vehicles to provide quite a stable base. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring this one. You can check them out linked in the video description below if you'd like to. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well. You can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, occasional votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.